Affairs and European Affairs. I now call on His Excellency Frank Walter Steinmeier, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Germany.
Herr Präsident, Exzellenzen!
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed colleagues, 70 years ago, light was shed on the dark 20th century with the foundation of the United Nations. This was a pivotal moment for our world, but it came not against the backdrop of glorious sunshine and pastures green. It was amid the ruins of the Second World War, over 50 million graves as the winter of the Cold War spread its frosty fingers, that the mothers and fathers of the United Nations forged the foundations of a new order. An order that is not perfect, which probably maybe never be perfect, but which had often enough protected us from relapsing into the old barbarism. Today, 70 years on, it is obvious that we're again living in restless times. Millions of people are sorely affected by wars and violence. More than 60 million people have fled their homes, more than at any time since the end of World War II. The foundations of the United Nations are still strong, but the world order built thereon has come loose from its moorings. The old balance of power is under pressure. Powerful new players have emerged on the world stage. And above all, it is non-state actors who are increasingly responsible for war and violence, for whom there are no rules, not even the minimum standards enshrined in the international law of war. We thus urgently need new buttresses and pillars so that the order based on the United Nations can withstand the tempests of our times. What form could these new pillars take? What should the world order of tomorrow look like? I don't think there is any theoretical answer to that question. The only answer is a practical one. Just as the Charter of the United Nations was adopted as a bold response to war and suffering, new pillars will only be formed today if states are ready to assume responsibility and together find concrete answers to the crises of our times, to poverty and underdevelopment, to refugees and migration, to the devastating civil war in Syria and failing states across the arc of crisis from Libya to Afghanistan, to religious extremism and terrorism and the murderous deeds of the people who call themselves Islamic State. There is, ladies and gentlemen, however, one major difference between now and the situation 70 years ago. The world of today is more closely interconnected than ever before. Borders are becoming indistinct. In this age of globalization, some say, the world has become a village. If that is so, esteemed colleagues, then we're all neighbors, in which case I would advise us to act as good neighbors. We come from very different backgrounds. We have different traditions and religions, different values and worldviews. This diversity must be respected. No worldview takes precedence over any other. But I can think of no culture in which people are unaware what it means to be a good neighbor, and in which people do not appreciate living in an atmosphere of good neighborliness. Nobody is investing so much hope in the spirit of good neighborliness today than the millions of women, men, and children who have fled their homes. My country has assumed responsibility for them over the past months. Since the start of the year, we have taken in 600,000 refugees. At present, up to 10,000 new refugees are arriving every day. These figures show that even we cannot shoulder this alone in the long term. We need a European solution together with our European neighbors, a solution that moreover builds on close cooperation with our neighbors around the Mediterranean, especially Turkey. Secondly, ladies and gentlemen, the United Nations relief agencies, UNHCR, the World Food Programme, UNRWA, and OCHA all help people in need on the spot with no intermediaries. It is scandalous that these organizations are so underfunded that they have to cut food rations and medical aid. I therefore met with the G7 states and other partners the day before yesterday, and I'm delighted to report that together we have raised an additional $1.8 billion, of which over 100 million come from Germany, for the UN relief agencies. This also helps relieve the burden on the neighboring countries in which the huge majority of refugees arrive, especially Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan. They too need our help so that one exodus does not trigger another. But good neighborliness, Mr. President, comprises more than just humanity and compassion. Good neighborliness also presupposes that we agree on joint rules we all have to obey. These include respecting each other's border and sovereignty. And this fundamental norm is still being violated even in Europe. As the European Union, we unanimously condemned Russia's annexation of the Crimea and the actions in eastern Ukraine, and we responded, but not only by means of condemnation and isolation, but also by launching a political process to diffuse the conflict. The OSCE has played an indispensable role in this process from the very beginning. We want to further strengthen the OSCE as an institution for our common security when we Germans assume its chairmanship next year. That too, Mr. President, that too, act of political responsibility is also part and parcel of good neighborliness. A neighborhood in which nobody looks beyond their garden gate will not be worth living in for long. People have to look because there are many conflicts that can only be solved in concert by means of multilateral diplomacy. This may take time and perseverance, but it works. This summer, the 5 permanent members of the Security Council and Germany concluded an agreement with Iran. After more than 10 years of negotiations, we not only managed to ensure that Iran will never have an atomic bomb and that we can verify this. No, the negotiations have also brought many actors, including Russia and the US, to sit at the same table. The negotiations have thus proven that while neighbors may not like each other, they can still solve problems together. Indeed, they must do so if living together is not to become unbearable for them both. The agreement thus reached has created a common ground on which greater security can be established in the Middle East. I say can be established if we continue to work on it. Yet, however, Mr. President, the realities are still somewhat different. In Syria, the slaughter knows no end. In the 5th year of the war, we will only stop it by acting together. We have to end the brutality of Assad's dictatorship as evinced by its use of barrel bombs and torture. We have to break the control of the Islamic State, and we have to silence the guns in Syria and finally provide for humanitarian access to the people who live there. For we also have common goals: to preserve the territorial integrity of Syria and to restore conditions in which all ethnic and religious groups can live in peace with each other and in peace with neighboring countries. These are goals that all actors believe in, have to believe in, whatever differences may exist between the US and Russia, between Saudi Arabia and Iran and other actors in the region. We already have a joint basis for action towards these goals. Here in the United Nations Security Council Resolution 2139, we have to implement these together with all stakeholders to take this as a first step towards diffusing this conflict. I appeal to the stakeholders in Syria and Syria's neighbors, but not only to them. Instead of lone decisions of individuals, lately by Russia, to take direct military action in Syria, we need now Russia to take political action, advocating transition in Syria. That would be an important contribution towards overcoming the stalemate, for this stalemate is a lethal one which claims new lives every day. At the risk of repeating myself, let me stress that when dealing with a humanitarian catastrophe as horrifying as the one in Syria, we are all neighbors. That is what we must all remind ourselves of and crawl out of our diplomatic trenches. In the end, there will not be a military solution, and neither supposed eternal truths nor national interests must be allowed to obstruct an effort to take the first steps towards diffusing the conflict in Syria. Esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. President, in these restless times, the idea of global good neighborliness would be no more than a dream if there wasn't already an umbrella, a roof, under which global neighborliness has been practiced for decades. Today, we need the United Nations more than ever. We need a legitimate and responsive United Nations, and that is why Germany is campaigning for the reform of the United Nations and the Security Council. That is why we are working with others on the major global projects, on the ambitious Sustainable Development Goals contained in the Agenda 2030, which has just been adopted, and on the equally, if not more ambitious goals to combat climate change, which we hope to adopt together in Paris this December. The United Nations provides a framework, a roof for our global endeavors, but under this roof, the work must continue at many levels. We Germans believe the way forward lies in regional cooperation in the European Union and the OSCE, and in cooperation with other regional organizations such as ASEAN and the African Union, and more. Secondly, we're committed to re-establishing and stabilizing state structures across the arc of crisis from Libya to Iraq and Afghanistan. And thirdly, especially in our capacity as presidency of the Human Rights Council, we are championing the fundamental importance of human rights, for no political order can endure if the people are not secure in their rights. To conclude, distinguished colleagues, Mr. President, I would like to return to the founding of the United Nations 70 years ago. As magnificent as this moment was, it also inspires a sense of great humility in me as a German, because the Charter of the United Nations was indeed partly a response of humankind to the war and inhumanity which had originated in my country. Over the 7 decades that have passed since then, Germany has been fortunate enough to be gradually and cautiously welcomed back into the heart of the international community. For that, we Germans are grateful, but we're also aware of our responsibility. When Willy Brandt became the Federal Chancellor of Germany in 1969, he said, "We Germans want to be a people of good neighbors." At this time, Germany was still divided And these words were meant as a gesture of reconciliation towards Poland, France, and the other European neighbors which had suffered greatly at German hands. Today, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, when a Syrian family in Berlin tells me their tale of war and expulsion, Brandt's words take on a new meaning. Now, the world has become smaller, but the crises are no fewer, and it is time for us to reaffirm once again. We Germans want to be a people of good neighbors to those both near and far. Thank you very much.
Je remercie